Hi everyone. Welcome to another episode in the Leading Safely podcast. It has been a crazy, hectic week, and I've done lots of recording with special guests both here in Australia as well as overseas. Today, though, this episode is a timely one, as Friday that just passed marked the commencement of the annual Australian Road Safety Foundation's Fatality Free Friday campaign. Since its inception in 2007, the ARSF's Fatality Free Friday campaign has continued to expand its operation and is now recognised as one of Australia's largest national community-based road safety programs. The ARSF's Fatality Free Friday initiative is about much more than just a single day, Friday, the 26th of May 2023. It operates on the belief that if Australians can go one day without a death on the road, they can demonstrate the impact a focus on road safety can have every day of the year. Road safety is a global issue that ranks as one of the most pressing matters facing society today. The social, economic and emotional costs are immense, and these figures are poised to increase unless something is done now. The ASRF encourages all road users to get involved and to take personal responsibility to help make a significant reduction in road trauma. The foundation is aiming for a longer-term community change. Today, I am chatting to none other than the CEO and founder of the Australian Road Safety Foundation, Russell White. So here it is. Hi Russell, thanks very much for joining me on the Leading Safely podcast.
Georgina, great to be with you.
Thank you. Now, as you know, I ask all my special guests for health and safety related questions.
Yep.
First question is, what do you think it means to be an effective health and safety leader?
Well, I think leadership in any field comes back to probably a couple of things. One is, I think, having a vision, so having something that people can rally around, that you can share a goal and a target, and I think give some people a sort of central channel to try and focus activity on. I think passion is another really big thing. I think, like in so many things in life, it's having the passion to keep you going. And then I think the third thing for me is being able to communicate. You know, you can have a goal, you can have a sort of a target to want to reach, but unless you can get enough people to rally around with you, you're always going to be struggling, I think, against the tide. So I think they're the main things for me. It's vision, passion and communication.
Yeah, they're definitely three key kind of tools that you'd like your leaders to have. And what about, and I'm sure you've come across this, people who are kind of stuck in their ways and don't want to make positive health and safety change? What kind of words of wisdom would you give to someone who was dealing with someone stuck and not wanting to move along?
It's a really interesting question in the road safety space. There's a lot of people stuck doing what they're traditionally been doing. But I think, for me, a lot of it again comes back to a why. And I think if you can change the narrative around how people perceive not only risk but also their own behaviour, I think they're the things I think become central to changing the dialogue or the narrative around safety. And you know, it's, again, driving's an interesting space. You know, if you're at a barbecue and you say to somebody, you know, what do you think about the roads? And I'll say, oh, there's all these dangerous drivers out there, all these crazy people. And you sort of say, oh, what do you think about yourself? Oh, it's not me, it's the other people. Yeah. It's everybody else but me.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've promoted a lot in recent times that the keys to road safety are in our own hands. You know, government, police, car manufacturers can only do so much. Ultimately, it's what we choose to do as road users and the habits that we've formed and the daily things that we do. It's often I think underestimated just how much those 1%ers, those things that people don't even think about most of the time, are often the thing that when a crash occurs, they're the things that have all combined at the wrong time. So I think when people get stuck with any behavioural change, it's having the motivation to go, why? So why do I need to change? And this applies not only to driving, but it's sports or health or education, whatever. So I think having a why and being able to communicate that is the critical thing. And I think it is one of the problems that we have in the road safety space, is I don't think there's a clear enough definition of that. People always think it's going to happen to somebody else. It'll never happen to them. And so that's the sort of thing we want to try and overcome. So I think, again, it's personal responsibility and just understanding the why. Why is safety important? And that's something that's, I think, every safety professional, not just in road safety.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the next question is a bit of an interesting one. And I have had some really interesting answers over the time, from things like a bracelet that zaps you when you're going to be silly.
Hey, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. We had the CEO of JFE, Shoji Power, say he wanted an alarm bell system that tells you when you're going to be, doing an at-risk behaviour, so an alarm would go off and do that. So if you could invent something that would solve a work safety or a road safety kind of issue, where you had as much money, as much resources that you needed, what would you invent and why?
Geez, that is an interesting question. The first thing that came to mind was a warning, danger, Will Robinson road light that could be with you in a car anytime something happens. Okay. It's actually funny. Years ago, I used to own a replica of a Trans Am that was in the Knight Rider TV show.
Oh wow! Okay.
So it could do everything. It was exactly it could talk, do all that stuff. It couldn't do the turbo jump, but for obvious reasons. But even that was, as a kid, I remember thinking that was fantastic. Like, how could you could have a car that could tell you what's about to happen, or how to get you out of trouble? It could be quite cool. And I think in a funny kind of way, we've headed towards that. Like, it's not the same thing, but the cars have become so intelligent now, and I think will continue to be. Not that I think we'll get to automation for quite some time.
We do have Tesla, though.
We do have Tesla, but I think the challenges that they're finding, not just Tesla, but I think most manufacturers, for a complex thing, I think they're realising it is really hard to stitch together. So I don't think we'll have full automation for a while. But I think, to go back to your question, if there was one thing I could do, it probably wouldn't be an invention like that. It would be looking at, I think, using things like simulators. To actually, I guess one of the things that would be a passion for me, and one of the things I had a bit of a vision about at the start of this journey, was could you have driving simulator centres, like right around the country, so that when you got your licence, but just like we do in aviation, just like we do in mining, just like we do in medical, why aren't we investing in VR technology, in simulator technology, to teach drivers to do the same in the same way as we do for pilots? Because I think it would provide a fairly cost-effective way to train large numbers of people in higher order skills, the things that you could never experience on the road for obvious reasons. Just like the pilot doesn't want to be practicing the super emergency in real life, you do it on a simulator. And so I think, for me, that would be the one thing. It'd be to have a coaching and simulation centres everywhere. And then we had everybody go through driver training in simulation.
So it's almost like defensive driving, kind of, but not physical in a VR setting, but obviously with those emergencies and type situations that you literally can't practice on the road for obvious.
They're one-offs. And if you can't, being able to, I guess, give people experience in those things. And the sim wouldn't be just static. It would have to have the 6 degrees of motion and be able to do all the stuff a car does. But you could train people and all that sort of stuff. Train them in safety systems. How does ABS work? How does all that sort of thing. Because I think a lot of people get a brand new car and they go, "This is great. My car's got all this stuff on it." Have no idea what the abbreviations mean or how those systems work.
Speaking of systems, and we were just kind of talking about, I guess, the cars becoming automated, but a lot of the safety systems that are in vehicles, they're for assisting drivers, like ABS. What's your kind of views on those, the mirrors, all the bits and the bells and whistles that are now in vehicles that kind of take it away from the human in being able to identify things and allow the vehicle to kind of stop you from reversing into a child? Obviously that's one we want to keep, but, what's your view on the tech that's kind of influencing and taking it away from a human approach?
Well, I think it's gone in this path because humans have demonstrated that, and I think this goes back all the way to when cars first started arriving. We really have been undercooking the training and the education part of that. I always remember a quote, Carl Benz, who, obviously from Mercedes-Benz, was quoted as saying he felt the car had a limited market because at the time he felt there could only be 1 million people around the world that could be trained well enough to drive it. So if the father of the motor car had that thought, I mean, we sell 1 million cars in Australia each year now. So I think there's a much greater level of intricacy and human factor that is still missing. And I think what's happened is the manufacturers have had to make the cars safer to make up for that inadequacy.
Yeah.
But sometimes people then, sort of use up those margins, or they think, oh, the car will fix it.
Yeah.
Those aids are literally that. They're an aid to help the driver if something was to happen. It's not to take away that responsibility. And really, no matter how much tech is on a car, as long as there's a human involved, then there's that level of personal responsibility. And the machine you can't outsource that responsibility. The car can only do so much. And it's a little bit like, I meant to remind you to say all the time, those aids are like having a lifeboat on a ship.
Yeah.
It's nice to know it's there, but you really hope you never
It's true. Yeah, it's true. And what about, I guess, you've had quite an interesting and great career. If you could go back in time and give yourself some advice on, being able to survive and getting to where you are today and thriving, what kind of advice or what would you tell yourself if you could go back in time?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. And I think there's probably a million things. How long have we got on this podcast? A long time that?
Well, as long as you need.
I think probably understanding that you can have a huge amount of influence. I think sometimes as a younger person you tend to think, well, it's just me, or what possible difference can I make? But then there's a point where it comes, you go, well, someone's got to do something. Like if nobody engages or nobody tries to change it, then nothing happens. And so I think for me it would be, not being afraid to take that leadership position, and I think share the story more. So that they would be probably the two things. So I've always believed that you can make a difference if you've got enough focus and enough dedication and enough commitment to that. And I think the other thing too is investing in yourself. I think part of what I've experienced in business and in the safety field, a lot of it does come back to personal development.
Yeah.
And they're all those key skills. It's being able to communicate and being able to present and all that sort of stuff. So I think if I had something like that, that would be probably the best advice I'd give myself.
Oh, that's nice.
Other than get out of bed earlier.
Have you got any children that you can pass that advice on to? It sounds like you would.
One daughter was quite good, the other one not so much.
Oh, okay.
She was a bit more of a
sleeper in a hay.
Pretty much.
Perfect. And now I understand you've had, as we said, a great career, and you specialise in that safety space, particularly road safety. From that, you've obviously done a lot with human factors, and you like to share some insights around the human factors space with our listeners.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've really studied a lot is the human element to road safety. And I think a lot of the times we focus so much on just simply the road rules. There's a perception out there that if we just stick to the road rules, everything will be okay. And certainly the rules are a key part of that. But what I've found in actually sitting next to people and coaching them for the last 30 plus years is that there's some really fundamental stuff that people aren't really thinking about. One is being connected to the car. So just simply making sure they're part of it by using their legs to balance themselves inside the car so as it goes around a corner. Their legs are doing the work, not so much the hands. People tend to use the steering wheel as a handlebar. So the issues that you have with that, if you start gripping the wheel too tight, not only does it tire you out very quickly, but the instant you clench your fist, it sets off the flight or flight response. So people are driving around highly stressed because they're holding themselves in the car with the steering wheel. And as a byproduct of that, the next thing that happens is it actually narrows your field of vision. So when people are driving around stressed, they're not looking far enough ahead. When something occurs, they'll say to the police officer, oh, well, the child stepped out from nowhere. Where in actual fact, if you were a bit more relaxed behind the wheel, if you were looking further ahead down the road, if you were a little bit more situationally aware, you might have picked up the clue that a flash of colour from a shop front.
Yeah.
Just enough to
in your peripheral, perhaps.
And so I think a lot of the times we drive, not just drivers, but I think road users generally, we tend to operate like we're doing a join the dot. There's no, it's to this intersection, to that roundabout, to that traffic light, to that driveway. And so there's no rhythm, there's no flow to anything. And quite often when you talk to people about these sort of more higher order skills, the light bulb goes on in their head that they suddenly, sometimes after 20 or 30 years, I've had drivers say to me, oh, now I realise why I had that crash 30 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Because up to that point it had been a complete mystery to them. They had no idea what had happened, what had led to this thing happening. So I think there's the next space for me in driving is not so much more, although the automation or the driver aids are helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think it still comes a point where we've got to invest more in the human element. And I look at the driving process like going to school. I'll often say to Year 12 students, it would be unfair of us as a society to only give you preschool level education, but expect you to pass a Year 12 exam with nothing in between.
Yeah.
And in a funny kind of way, it's sort of what we expect drivers to do. We give them a tiny bit of education at that sort of LP plate phase. There's been nothing prior and generally nothing after that. And we expect them to be really good. They just, the road rules, you can basically move the car away, off you go. And what we see then is the moment the P plates go on, there's a huge spike in road fatalities going from a learner phase, which is probably the safest anyone's going to be, and which sounds really counterproductive or counterintuitive, but the stats show us that as an L plater, you're highly unlikely to have a major crash. The moment you put the P plates on, that trajectory takes off like a rocket, and it stays that way until you're about 25. It's peters down after that. But then it also goes in the same direction when you reach your 50s. It starts heading up again. So we've got a bookend of issues either side. And to me, that's again where the human factors are really the critical thing. It's the missing piece of the puzzle. It's the hardest thing to do. I mean, we find that with even not just on the driver safety side, but on the Australian Road Safety Foundation, the work we do with Fatality Free Friday, which is coming up. You're trying to change people's attitudes, culture, behaviour, views, and it's the hardest thing to do. It's easy to change a speed sign or change some legislation, but trying to change behaviour is, we're in the toughest game in town. It's a really big space, and it needs, I think, a different approach. If I had my time over again, I'm probably going back to one of our previous responses. If you could change something, you'd nearly bin the whole current licensing system and start all over again.
Okay.
To have milestones of different learning opportunities right throughout someone's training career. It's the only thing, it's the most dangerous thing a person will do on a daily basis, and it's the thing that you get one induction of training at a certain point in your life, and unless you do some sort of company training or something else, then it doesn't get touched again. And so then we wonder why people have crashes. Now, interestingly, in the workspace, a vehicle incident is the number one thing that's going to cause death and injury in a workplace.
Yeah.
So no matter how dangerous what your main job is, whether that's pulling stuff out of the ground or electricity or underwater welding, whatever, the most dangerous thing that a worker is going to be doing is driving from home to the work site or from the work site to the depot or whatever. So there's a huge, and Georgina, I have to say, if we could change that statistic alone in the work-related field, we'd halve our road toll if we could get that same sort of approach.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that specific statistic, that kind of journey incident or event, is so major, so prolific. However, so many different organisations will either play it down, relate it back to the employee, not count it towards their, try and make sure it doesn't count towards their statistics, or lay blame elsewhere without kind of factoring in that it is actually tied into the fact they were travelling to work, and there are some contributory factors around that work relation that do come into play with that.
Absolutely.
So I think with what you've said though, combining everything, like having those milestones in there, regardless of whether it's a work-related, non-work-related, if it's on the road, in general while you're out with your family, you can maybe not prevent everything from happening, but you can certainly mitigate that risk. It may not end in a fatality. It may just end in, you walking away, but you have a broken arm.
Yeah.
And, whilst I'm never of the field of, zero fatalities, I think if you had to swap between losing a family, of loved ones and having the family walk away, but they have just some, lacerations and injuries, as terrible as it sounds, I would much rather the family walk away with minimal injuries than lose everyone, in that situation. So,
and I think when we talk to people that have lost family members, you would do anything in your power to reverse that from happening.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything. Because the grief and the tragedy of it all is just so deep and heart-wrenching. And we talked to a lot of families that have had to go through that. And like I said, you do anything in your power to try and stop them from going through that. So again, this circulates back again to the why you remember those stories. And I'll often say to my team, when we sit down with a family like that, I'll often say, well, that's the reason why we do what we do. It's to try and stop that from happening.
Yeah. And obviously you mentioned about Fatality Free Friday coming up. When is that? What is it about?
The Fatality Free Friday really started back in 2007. It was part of the first United Nations Global Road Safety Week. It was the only event that happened in Australia. It was a pivotal point for me because I was about 2 months before. I was sitting in a conference on the Gold Coast and there was a chap from the World Bank there talking about the global road safety statistics, and I knew the Australian figures really well, but he stood up there and he said, that 1.3 million people will lose their lives on the world's roads in this year. Just every single year it's about 1.3 million. And that really shocked me. I thought, man, I've got to do more. If I'm going to try and change something, I've got to do more than what I was currently doing. And then he said, the interesting thing, it was road safety needed two things. It needs leadership, and we need to be able to speed up the transfer of information. And I thought, by leadership, if you could have a national event, a target day, to sort of say to people, we want to have no fatalities on this one day. And hence I literally walked out there with the concept of Fatality Free Friday in my head. So the view was, in year one, we just had it as a media call, and it was a bit of a campaign. But then it just grew to a point now where it's been going since 2007. We've had, I suppose, to be tens of thousands of people that have helped us along the way with promoting it. And it's basically a call to action to everyone right across the country. If we can have one Fatality Free Friday, then we should be able to do it every single day. So Fatality Free Friday is really about a month now of campaigning. We'll launch that at the end of April. It'll go through all the way to the end of May. The target day is always the last Friday in May. And so we're after that day specifically to be fatality free. But we're sort of along the way asking councils and organisations, individuals, get on the ARSF website and join that promise. Ultimately what we're driving for is a fatality free future.
Perfect. So if our listeners do want to be involved, it's just to go to that website. So it's the Australian Road Safety Foundation. Is that AS?
Correct. So
ARSF.
arsf.com.au, and then there's other information there. There's things you can download. There's other ways you can show your support with that. We can give you some help on hosting your own internal events, that sort of thing. But it's about ramping up the community ownership of road safety. I think a lot of the time people look at road safety and think it's a government problem or it's a police problem. But in actual fact, it's a community issue. And I think once we get our heads around that, again, the keys rest with us. Then that's when we've got the real chance to change something.
That's great. Would be very helpful, but also beneficial to worldwide. People did join in and share that message, and also participate in a proper way, being part of it as well. So
because it does come back to ownership. And again, probably something we started off with. It's about, if people feel like they've got some power to change it, then they're more likely to engage and do that little bit. Because I think in road safety, people look at the whole issue and go, well, again, I'm just one person.
It's too hard as well.
How can I make a difference?
Yeah, no, I agree.
You can make a difference from your own actions. So.
Well, clearly, you've done so with your career, so definitely and appreciate the efforts, obviously, that you have done over time in getting the message out there as well. So thank you, and thank you for joining me on the podcast. It's been great having you here.
Fantastic, Georgina. Been great to be part of it.
Awesome, thank you. So there you have it. I certainly have learned a thing or two about driving from chatting with Russell, and I've been driving since I was 16. It goes to show you that you can never know all there is to know about a particular topic, so most certainly appreciated chatting with him. If you're interested in joining the fatality-free movement, you can do so by heading to arsf.com.au 1920x1080.com.au. I hope that you will check it out and get behind it. I know that every single one of us has either been involved directly or knows someone who in their lifetime has had some sort of road event. And I know there are so many of us who have been impacted by a road fatality event. Needless to say, it is a great cause. Now, things are starting to get exciting with my trip to the States in a little over 6 weeks, where I will be speaking at the 2023 annual Community of Human and Organisational Learning Conference in Portsmouth, Virginia. To say I am pumped is an understatement. So if you are listening to this and from that neck of the woods, please do come and say hi. Rightio, well that brings us to the close of another episode. Until next time, stay safe.